Vlad, Moscow Courier. Today's story is different. People ask me all the time, how much does it actually cost to live in Moscow? Not the tourist version, not the expat version, the real version. What does a normal person in this city actually spend every month to have a real life? Today, I'm going to show you every category, every number, from someone who actually lives here and actually pays these prices every single day. Let's go. Moscow. 2026, 12 million people, one of the largest cities in Europe, one of the most expensive cities in Russia, and one of the most misunderstood cities in the world when it comes to what things actually cost. The numbers that most websites give you about the cost of living in Moscow are wrong in ways that matter. They are wrong because they are averages, and averages in a city this size tell you almost nothing useful about what any specific person actually experiences. Today, I'm going to walk you through the real numbers, not the averages, the actual prices that actual people pay for the actual things that make up an actual life in this city. Housing. If you want to understand the cost of living in Moscow, you have to start with housing because housing is where the biggest decisions get made. Moscow housing exists on a spectrum that is wider than most people from outside the city understand. At one end are the apartments in the central districts, Tverskoy, Arbat, Kamovniki. A one-bedroom apartment in these neighborhoods rents for between 80,000 and 150,000 rubles per month, between $900 and $1,700. To buy such an apartment, you would spend between 15 and 30 million rubles, between $170,000 and $330,000. These are prices that most Muscovites cannot pay. At the other end are the outer districts, the places where I work, where I deliver packages every day. Butovo, Zelenograd, Lyubertsy. In these areas, the numbers are completely different. A one-bedroom apartment in a standard Soviet-era building rents for between 35,000 and 55,000 rubles per month, between $400 and $600. A two-bedroom apartment rents for between 45,000 and 70,000 rubles, between $500 and $800. To buy an apartment in these areas, you spend between 4 and 8 million rubles, between $45,000 and $90,000. These are the numbers of a life that works, that has a roof and walls and a place to sleep and a kitchen where you can make food. There is a third category that most discussions ignore, the inherited apartment. Moscow has an enormous stock of apartments that were originally Soviet state housing and that were privatized in the early 1990s when the Soviet system collapsed. The result is that a significant portion of Moscow's population lives in apartments they own outright with no mortgage and no rent, inherited from parents or grandparents who received their allocation from the Soviet system. These people have a relationship with housing costs that is completely different from people who are renting. Their housing cost is essentially zero. Utilities in Moscow are subsidized by the state in ways that produce costs that Americans consistently find surprising. The heating in a Moscow apartment runs from a central heating plant that serves an entire neighborhood and is paid for through a flat monthly fee. For a standard apartment, the monthly heating cost runs between 2,000 and 4,000 rubles, between $22 and $44 per month. For heat that runs through a genuine Moscow winter, cold water costs between 500 and 1,500 rubles per month, between $6 and $17. Electricity costs between 900 and 1,500 rubles per month, between $10 and $17. Internet costs between 400 and 700 rubles per month, between $4 and $8. The total utility bill for a Moscow apartment, including heating, water, electricity, and internet, runs between 5,000 and 8,000 rubles per month, between $55 and $90. This is the number that people from Western countries find most difficult to believe. $55 to $90 a month for all utilities, including heat, in a cold climate city. Food. The cost of food in Moscow in 2026 reflects a city that has two distinct food economies: the formal economy of supermarkets and the informal economy of markets and street vendors. In the formal supermarket economy, the prices for basic goods are as follows. A kilogram of bread costs between 80 and 120 rubles, between 90 cents and $1.30. A liter of milk costs between 70 and 100 rubles, between 75 cents and $1.10. A dozen eggs costs between 120 and 180 rubles, between $1.30 and $2. A kilogram of chicken costs between 250 and 350 rubles, between $2.75 and $3.85. A kilogram of potatoes costs between 40 and 70 rubles, between 45 and 75 cents. A typical Moscow family of 3 cooking most meals at home spends between 15,000 and 25,000 rubles per month on groceries, between $165 and $275. Eating out changes the calculation. A meal at a standard cafe where a working Muscovite might have lunch costs between 400 and 800 rubles, between 450 and 875. A business lunch, including soup, main course, salad, and a drink, costs between 300 and 500 rubles, between 330 and 550. The typical Muscovite who eats out 2 to 3 times per week spends between 10,000 and 20,000 rubles per month on cafe and restaurant visits, between $110 and $220. Transportation. Getting around Moscow costs money in ways that vary dramatically depending on how you choose to move through the city. The metro is the baseline. The Moscow Metro in 2026 costs 46 rubles per ride using a Troika card. 46 rubles is approximately 50 cents. A monthly unlimited metro pass costs 2,800 rubles, approximately $31. For this $31, you can ride the metro as many times as you want for an entire month. You can also use the pass on the Moscow Central Circle, the Central Diameters, the monorail, and most city buses. This is the transportation cost for a Muscovite who relies entirely on public transit. $31 a month for unlimited access to one of the most extensive urban transit systems in the world. The metro runs from approximately 5:30 in the morning until 1 in the morning. During peak hours, trains run every 90 seconds on the busiest lines. The cars are clean. The stations are in many cases genuinely beautiful. This is the baseline Moscow transportation cost, $31 a month. For Muscovites who use cars, the calculation is completely different. Moscow has serious traffic congestion. The cost of owning and operating a car includes fuel, which in 2026 costs approximately 60 rubles per liter for the most common grade of gasoline. Insurance for a standard car runs between 15,000 and 40,000 rubles per year. Parking in central and middle ring areas where paid parking has been introduced adds additional cost. Most Muscovites who own cars also have metro passes. They use the metro when it is faster and the car when it is more convenient. This combination produces a transportation budget that for a car-owning Muscovite in an outer district runs between 5,000 and 15,000 rubles per month, between $55 and $165. Healthcare. The cost of healthcare in Moscow in 2026 is one of the areas where the gap between the official system and practical reality is most significant. The official system is the compulsory medical insurance system, which provides every Russian citizen with access to state polyclinics and hospitals at no direct cost at the point of service. The system is real. The polyclinics exist. The hospitals exist. The doctors exist. The access is genuine in the sense that a person who needs medical care and is willing to navigate the system can obtain it without paying directly. The practical experience of using this system is variable. In some polyclinics, the care is genuinely good. In others, it is adequate. Waiting times for specialist appointments can be long, weeks in some cases, months for certain specialties. Many Muscovites use the state system for routine care and supplement it with private care when waiting times or quality concerns justify the additional cost. A consultation with a general practitioner at a standard private clinic costs between 1,500 and 3,000 rubles, between $16 and $33. A consultation with a specialist costs between 2,000 and 5,000 rubles, between $22 and $55. A standard blood panel at a private laboratory costs between 2,000 and 4,000 rubles, between $22 and $44. An MRI scan costs between 4,000 and 8,000 rubles, between $44 and $88. These prices will seem extraordinarily low to Americans who have experienced the American healthcare system. They are the actual prices charged by actual private medical facilities in Moscow in 2026. Dental care follows a similar pattern. A routine cleaning and checkup at a private dental clinic costs between 1,500 and 3,000 rubles, between $16 and $33. A filling costs between 2,000 and 5,000 rubles, between $22 and $55. A crown costs between 10,000 and 30,000 rubles, between $110 and $330. Muscovites who use private dental care regularly spend between 10,000 and 30,000 rubles per year on dental maintenance, between $110 and $330 annually. Medications are another category where Moscow prices consistently surprise people from Western countries. Amoxicillin costs between 100 and 250 rubles for a standard course, between $1.10 and $2.75. Ibuprofen costs between 50 and 150 rubles for a package, between 55 cents and $1.65. The practical result is that most routine medication needs can be met in Moscow at costs that are very low by Western standards. Education. Public school education in Moscow is free through the end of secondary school. The quality of public schools varies by district and by specific institution in ways that are well understood by Muscovite parents and that drive significant decisions about where to live. The most sought-after public schools operate in specific neighborhoods and have informal systems of selective admission that are technically illegal but practically widespread. Parents who can afford to live near these schools pay in housing costs what they would otherwise pay in school fees. Private school education in Moscow costs between 200,000 and 1 million rubles per year, between $2,200 and $11,000 per year. The most expensive private schools offer international curricula, English language instruction, and small class sizes. The middle tier of private schools charges between 200,000 and 400,000 rubles per year and serves a larger segment of the upper middle class population. University education has a dual structure. State universities offer fully funded places for students who score highly enough on the Unified State Examination. These places are free. No tuition. Competition for funded places at prestigious institutions is intense. Students who do not qualify for funded places can pay for commercial places. The cost of a commercial place at a state university in Moscow ranges from 200,000 to 450,000 rubles per year, between $2,200 and $5,000 per year. This is substantially less than comparable private university education in the United States. Clothing and personal expenses. The range of clothing available in Moscow reflects a market that has changed substantially since 2022, when many Western fashion brands reduced their Russian operations. The gap has been filled by domestic brands and brands from countries that maintained commercial relationships with Russia. A pair of jeans of reasonable quality costs between 3,000 and 8,000 rubles, between $33 and $88. A winter coat sufficient for a Moscow winter costs between 5,000 and 20,000 rubles, between $55 and $220. A pair of athletic shoes costs between 3,000 and 10,000 rubles, between $33 and $110. A Muscovite who dresses adequately without prioritizing fashion spends between 30,000 and 60,000 rubles per year on clothing, between $330 and $660 annually. Personal care and grooming expenses reflect a service economy that is genuinely competitive. A haircut at a standard barbershop costs between 500 and 1,500 rubles, between 550 and 1,650. A gym membership at a standard fitness club in an outer district costs between 2,000 and 4,000 rubles per month, between $22 and $44. Most Muscovites who exercise regularly use the free outdoor fitness equipment installed in parks throughout the city, or use facilities operated by their employer at subsidized rates. Entertainment and leisure. The Bolshoi Theater offers tickets ranging from 500 rubles for seats in the upper tiers to 15,000 rubles for premium seats, between $550 and $165. A cinema ticket costs between 300 and 800 rubles, between 330 and 880. A museum admission costs between 300 and 1,000 rubles, between $330 and $11. A coffee at a standard Moscow cafe costs between 250 and 400 rubles, between 275 and 440. A beer at a standard Moscow bar costs between 200 and 400 rubles, between 220 and 440. A dinner for two at a mid-range Moscow restaurant with starters, main courses, and drinks costs between 3,000 and 6,000 rubles, between $33 and $66. The total picture. When you add up all the numbers across all the categories, what you get is a picture of the cost of living in Moscow in 2026 that is significantly more varied and nuanced than any single number can capture. Let me give you three versions of this picture. Three different Moscow lives at three different budget levels. Each one real. Each one lived by real people on these streets right now. The first life is the life of a Muscovite who owns their apartment outright. Inherited, paid off, no mortgage, no rent. This is not a rare situation. A significant portion of Moscow's population lives this way. The Soviet privatization of the early 1990s transferred ownership of an enormous stock of apartments to the people who lived in them. Those people are now in their 60s and 70s. Their children inherited. For these people, the housing cost is zero or close to zero. Their monthly expenses look like this. Utilities, including heating, water, electricity, and internet, cost between 5,000 and 8,000 rubles, between $55 and $88. Food cooked primarily at home with occasional cafe visits costs between 15,000 and 25,000 rubles, between $165 and $275. Transportation using a monthly metro pass costs 2,800 rubles, $31. Healthcare through the state system, supplemented by occasional private consultations, costs between 0 and 5,000 rubles per month on average. Clothing and personal care costs between 3,000 and 6,000 rubles per month averaged over the year. Entertainment and leisure costs between 3,000 and 8,000 rubles per month. Total monthly expenses for this person, between 28,800 and 57,800 rubles, between $317 and $636. This is the cost of a real life in Moscow for a person who owns their housing. A comfortable life, not a luxurious life, but a life with enough, with food and warmth and culture and the ability to participate in the social life of one of the world's great cities. For between $317 and $636 per month. This number shocks people from Western countries every time they hear it. It should not shock them. It is the logical result of solving the housing problem in a city where everything else costs significantly less than in comparable Western cities. The second life is the life of a young professional renting in an outer district, working in a standard office job that pays between 60,000 and 120,000 rubles per month, between $660 and $1,320 per month. Their monthly expenses look like this. Rent for a one-bedroom apartment in an outer district costs between 35,000 and 55,000 rubles, between $385 and $605. Utilities on top of rent cost between 5,000 and 8,000 rubles. Food with a mix of home cooking and regular cafe visits costs between 20,000 and 35,000 rubles. Transportation using a metro pass and occasional ride-sharing costs between 3,000 and 6,000 rubles. Healthcare supplemented by private consultations costs between 2,000 and 5,000 rubles per month on average. Clothing and personal care at a level appropriate for professional life costs between 5,000 and 10,000 rubles per month. Entertainment reflecting the social life of a young professional costs between 8,000 and 15,000 rubles. Total monthly expenses for this person, between 78,000 and 134,000 rubles. Between $858 and $1,474. Against a salary of 60,000 to 120,000 rubles, this means that the lower salary range leaves very little room after expenses, and the higher salary range allows for genuine saving. This is the financial reality of being a young professional renting in Moscow in 2026. Livable, sometimes comfortable, rarely easy. With enough margin at the higher end of the salary range to build something over time, but with the permanent awareness that the housing cost is the dominant fact of the financial situation, and that solving that problem is the work of years, not months. The third life is the life of a courier. My life. Working independently. Taking orders when it makes sense. Earning between 20,000 and 40,000 rubles per month, depending on how many hours are worked. Between $220 and $440. This is not a high income by Moscow standards. It is not intended to be. It is a flexible income that suits a specific way of living. The monthly expenses for this life look like this. Housing is the critical variable. If you own your apartment or live with family, the housing cost is low or zero and the income is workable. Food cooked almost entirely at home costs between 10,000 and 15,000 rubles. Transportation costs between 1,000 and 2,000 rubles per month for bike maintenance. Healthcare through the state system costs between 0 and 2,000 rubles per month on average. Clothing and personal care at a basic functional level costs between 2,000 and 4,000 rubles per month, averaged over the year. Entertainment at the free and low-cost end of Moscow's cultural offerings costs between 1,000 and 3,000 rubles. Total monthly expenses assuming owned or family housing, between 14,000 and 26,000 rubles. Between $154 and $286. Against an income of 20,000 to 40,000 rubles, this leaves between 6,000 and 14,000 rubles per month after expenses. Between $66 and $154. This is not comfortable saving. It is modest saving. It is the financial reality of a flexible working life in Moscow when housing cost is not a factor. What do these three pictures tell us about the real cost of living in Moscow in 2026? They tell us that housing is the dominant variable, that the difference between owning your housing and renting it is the difference between a manageable Moscow life on a modest income and a difficult Moscow life on a moderate income. They tell us that the state subsidies that persist in certain sectors compress the cost of basic necessities in ways that give Moscow a different cost structure than cities of comparable size in Western Europe or North America. They tell us that the social and cultural life of the city is genuinely accessible at low price points. The metro is cheap. The parks are free. The museums are affordable. The outdoor skating rinks are free. A Muscovite who has solved the housing problem can have a genuinely rich social and cultural life for an amount that would not cover a single night out in London or New York. The inequality is real and it is significant. The Moscow of the central districts and the Moscow of the outer districts are different cities in their economic reality, even as they are the same city in their geography and their culture. The person who inherited their apartment in the Arbat and the person who is paying market rent in Butovo are both Muscovites. Both ride the same metro. Both have access to the same museums and parks and cultural life. But their economic situations are as different as the neighborhoods they live in. The inheritance of Soviet-era housing, which was distributed according to principles that had nothing to do with market value, has created a form of wealth inequality that is invisible in official statistics and profoundly important in practical reality. The inflation picture matters too. Russia has experienced significant inflation in the years since 2022. Food prices have risen significantly. Certain categories of imported goods have become more expensive or less available. The cost of electronics and appliances has increased substantially. The net effect for the average Muscovite has been a meaningful reduction in purchasing power that has been partially offset by wage increases in certain sectors and partially absorbed through changes in consumption patterns. People buy more domestic goods and fewer imported ones. People eat out less and cook more. People repair rather than replace. These are the adjustments that ordinary people make when prices rise faster than incomes. They are being made throughout Moscow right now. On these streets, In these apartments, in these kitchens where people are figuring out how to maintain a real life within a budget that has been compressed by forces outside their control. I ride through this city every day. I see the people who have solved the housing question and the people who have not. I see the grandmother who owns her apartment and spends her pension on food and utilities and lives with a financial security that her income alone would not provide. I see the young couple who are renting together and saving for a down payment and calculating every month how many years it will take at this rate to get where they are trying to go. I see the student who lives with their parents because the alternative is not financially viable. I see all of these lives from my bike every day. They are all Moscow lives. They are all real. And they all exist within the numbers I have given you today. Numbers that tell you something true about this city, and that do not tell you everything. Because numbers never tell you everything. They tell you the shape of things. The people fill in the rest. Subscribe if you want to keep seeing Moscow through my camera. Come back next week. There is always more to show you, and leave me a comment. What surprised you most about these numbers? I read every single one.